Guys, it's Kaylee. Welcome back to Hippie in a Suit, where every week I talk about sustainability because I dream of a world where politicians actually take climate change seriously and do something about it. So you may have heard the US is officially back in the Paris Climate Agreement as of this week, and it's a huge moment for the international community and anyone who cares about climate action and justice. For me, it's a very exciting moment because I was actually in Paris in 2015 at COP21 as a youth participant when the negotiation and agreement was reached. And I was there with a group of friends and former colleagues, all part of an NGO that I co-founded in university with two friends. At the time, we were all very early in our careers. The NGO was small. We had to fit 8 of us in a 1-bedroom apartment in Paris because we didn't really have the means to be there, but we knew it was a historic moment and we knew it was really important. So every single day we took transit and made our way up to the conference center to participate and advocate for action in any way that we could. So when that agreement was reached, it was such an exciting and huge moment. It felt like we were turning a corner. And then, as we know, unfortunately, one of the biggest parties to the agreement backed out, which was really disappointing. So the rejoining is a huge moment for the international community. It's something that really matters, and it particularly matters this year. So what I'm going to talk about today is how the US has been a party to the agreement, how their withdrawal process happened, how their rejoining process happened, and then most importantly, why it's a big deal for 2021. So stick with me and let's dive in. Okay, so to start, I think it's important to give you the super high level big picture of the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm not going to go into it in depth, but if you'd be interested in seeing a video about more detail on the agreement, what's included within it, how it was negotiated, etc., you can just leave me a comment below and I will note that. But for the purposes of this video, I'm just going to focus on the really high level information. The Paris Climate Agreement was adopted on December 12, 2015 after a landmark negotiation between 197 countries who are part of what's called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Every single year, that group of countries meets under what's called the Conference of the Parties, or the COP. In 2015, it was COP21, so 21 iterations, and there was a lot going into that meeting. The international community had been struggling to reach an agreement for years, and so reaching the accord at COP21 was a really huge moment. After that, 190 of the 197 nations did end up ratifying the agreement, meaning it was agreed at this summit, and then they took it back home, made sure it worked with their own national policies and regulation, and put it into effect. The 7 countries that did not end up adopting the agreement were Iran, Iraq, Turkey, Eritrea, Libya, Yemen, and South Sudan. You might be wondering what allowed for COP21 to result in an agreement, because it had been trying for so many years before without any results or without a formal legally binding agreement. So what was different about this particular COP? Well, there was a shift in the approach to the negotiation. Previously, it had been quite a top-down approach. So we would look at the total number of emissions that need to be reduced and try and find a way to divvy them up among countries. And this just frankly was not working. However, going into COP21, the countries decided to do something a bit different, and that was to ask each country how much they could reasonably reduce emissions, and then to add up all of those contributions and make the agreement around that. These are called nationally determined contributions, and I will come back to that word, NDCs, a lot, so take note of it. It's very important in the international climate circles. So going into Paris, having this more bottom-up approach really allowed for the agreement to be met. The Paris Agreement pledges to keep global warming well below 2 degrees Celsius, aiming for 1.5 degrees Celsius. To put this in perspective, we're actually already experiencing temperature rises of about 1.2 degrees Celsius. So 1.5 is extremely, extremely ambitious, but we wanted that level of ambition built in. Unfortunately, all of those NDCs, those contributions that countries said they could make, did not add up to the amount of reductions that we needed in order to keep climate change below 2 degrees, let alone 1.5. However, the Paris Agreement is built on a 5-year review cycle. So every 5 years, the idea is that the Paris Agreement should increase in its ambition because there's new technology, there's new contexts, hopefully the situation has changed and it's easier to implement climate policies and technologies. So the idea was that every 5 years, the agreement would be reviewed and countries would resubmit their contributions so that the agreement would get increasingly more ambitious over time. The Paris Agreement is a piece of international law, meaning that it is legally binding, but in actuality, it's made up of some pieces that are binding and some pieces that are non-binding. And the biggest differentiation here is that while the agreement itself is binding, the contributions that countries have agreed to make are non-binding. So in actuality, they can't be held to account for missing those contributions. And this is a huge criticism of the agreement, that it has no teeth. But I just think it's so important we remember before this we had nothing. And, don't let perfect be the enemy of the good. This agreement creates a strong foundation for taking climate action amongst international participants. Okay, so now you kind of have the big picture on the Paris Agreement, enough of what you need to know to see why it's so important to have the US as a part of the agreement. Let's move into what the US's role was in the negotiation and also their role generally in climate action. The first thing you need to know about this is that the US is the world's second largest emitter and the world's largest economy. It is the second largest emitter behind China, and it is the largest emitter historically, meaning that if you took all the carbon that's ever been emitted, the US in total has emitted the most carbon. So it's an incredibly important actor in climate change because of how much it has contributed to it and because of how important its economy is in the big picture. I'm going to talk about a lot of dates in the next section, so I'm going to do a timeline to kind of help you keep track of this all. So if I rewind us back to 2014, we're coming off of years of failed climate negotiations. I would say the morale was quite low, and then there was this very important moment for climate diplomacy that everyone believes was fundamental to achieving the Paris Agreement. And that was that the president at the time, Barack Obama, and the leader of China, Xi Jinping, came together and agreed in 2014 to take climate action. They made this deal. And this was so huge because these are the two biggest emitters on the planet. Many experts on the negotiations believe had that not happened, we probably wouldn't have arrived at the climate agreement. So as I mentioned at the beginning, the agreement was adopted at the summit in December, but it wasn't until April on Earth Day when countries could go back and check and make sure everything worked in their national systems that signatures actually happened, or kind of subscribing to the agreement actually happened. So the US officially joined the agreement in April 2016, and then in September 2016, they passed a motion to make it official within their own national politics, and the agreement then came into effect on November 4th, 2016, and that was because there was enough countries that ratified to make it official. At the time that the US joined the agreement, their NDC or commitment was to reduce CO2 emissions by 28% below 2005 levels by 2025. And President Obama also committed $3 billion to the Green Climate Fund. The Paris Agreement does have a provision for withdrawing. It is called Article 28, and it has two very important stipulations that really matter when I'm telling the US's story of this. The first stipulation is that a country cannot leave the agreement until 3 years after it has taken effect in that country, and that they must wait 1 year after giving notice to officially leave. the agreement. Donald Trump was elected into office on November 8th, 2016, just 4 days after the Paris Agreement came into effect. Now, he has always been a harsh critic of the Paris Agreement, so it was assumed that he would want to leave. But as I mentioned, there were these provisions that he was not allowed to leave the agreement until 3 years after the date it came into effect. And so there was nothing he could do until November 4th, 2019. In June 2019, in a statement in the Rose Garden, Trump signaled his ambition and intention to leave the agreement. And as promised, on November 4th, 2019, they filed their notice and they started that one-year withdrawal process. On November 4th, 2020, the US officially exited the agreement. Ironically, this was just the day after the election that would ultimately see President Trump out of the White House. A couple other things I want to note here. The first thing is that in that period in between, so from the time the notice was given until the US actually exited, and all the years before that, while Trump was waiting to give that notice, the US was still a party to the agreement, and therefore they were obligated to everything that was in that agreement, including reporting on their emissions. Another important thing is that when Donald Trump left the Paris Agreement, a number of cities and states and other actors like businesses did come forward and recommit to the Paris Climate Agreement. So we saw this upswell in local action, which was quite exciting to see and also gave a lot of hope for the agreement's future, even without having one of the largest emitters as a party to the agreement. When Joe Biden was running for president, he made no mistake about the Paris Agreement. He talked about it very openly and said that if he were in office, the first day he would be rejoining it. And in fact, he kept that word, and on January 20th, 2021, he re-signed the Paris Agreement via an executive order and re-entered the agreement. There's a 30-day instatement period, so the US officially became a party to the agreement again on February 19th, 2021. With his announcement to rejoin the Paris Agreement, he also made two very important announcements. The first was to release his climate action plan on Earth Day, April 22nd, 2021. And no one knows exactly what that will include, but based on what he said during his campaign, it's assumed that that will include net zero carbon emissions by 2050 and a complete decarbonization of the electricity system in the US by 2035. In addition, he made the commitment to bring together a large group of world leaders on Earth Day as well, to up their commitment to the Paris Agreement and accelerate climate action in the lead up to the next conference of the parties. Okay, so does this matter? Is this a big deal? I mean, of course it's a big deal, and I want to dive into a few reasons why it matters. So the first and probably the most obvious is that the US is very important diplomatically and in multilateral circles. It is a huge economy, the largest economy. It's a huge emitter, so in climate circles that matters a great deal. And it's also a superpower, so when it does something, usually other countries follow suit, and when it doesn't do something, that has ripple effects. So what we saw when Trump left is this perfect recipe for dilution of ambition. Because if the second largest emitter isn't there, this country that's supposed to be a leader, then it gives a lot of other countries an excuse to not do anything. And that can be quite problematic when this is a very global problem that involves all the actors. But now with the US back in and China recently making a commitment to achieve net zero by 2060, there's a lot of excitement about what this could mean in the climate negotiation. One of the things that we're looking at specifically is that perhaps India, which is the second most populous country on the planet and the third largest emitter, will potentially do some sort of commitment as well, and then that others will follow suit. Another reason that this is a big deal is linked to a principle that is fundamental to the Paris Agreement, which is called Common but Differentiated Responsibility, or CBDR. Now, this principle is a bit policy wonk-ish, but I think you'll understand it very quickly once I explain it. So the idea here is that in global problems, every country is responsible for contributing to the solution. But not every country is equally responsible. So what this essentially boils down to is that those who contributed the most to the problem and those that have the greatest means to fix it have more responsibility in the overall system. And this matters a great deal because developing countries are facing the brunt of the impacts of climate change, but they did the least to contribute to it, and they have the least resources to address it. This is where we see things like the Green Climate Fund coming into play, where rich, developed countries who emitted a lot of CO2 and created the problem to a large extent are creating the resources necessary for the developing countries to address these issues because it is a global problem. As I've mentioned over and over in this video, the US being the second largest emitter and the largest historical emitter, it means that their role in CBDR is incredibly important. Their responsibility also as a rich nation and a nation that does a lot of development assistance is crucial. And then this links to the climate finance reason I think this is very important. As was mentioned, Obama committed to $3 billion US dollars to the Green Climate Fund, but only $1 billion of that was ever actually materialized. And now there's even a push for that number to go as high as $8 billion to enable these developing countries to adapt and also to address climate change in their growth trajectories. So the US's role in climate finance could not be more important as well. And finally, because of the US's huge economy, anytime it does anything, it's an investment signal. Now, we've already seen quite a lot of changes in the way that business and finance approach climate. It's been taken much more seriously in recent years. But when a big country like the US signals that it's going to start taking policy action on climate, this has massive implications for the business community, in a good way in this case. And what we will see is that we will see the industry recognize that climate is a huge risk that they need to mitigate, but also that contributing to a low carbon economy is a huge business opportunity. And this creates more certainty in the business community to start developing these kind of businesses, ensuring that they're properly mitigating their CO2 emissions, etc. So this is an investment signal that's very important because we can't do this just all through policy. We need companies to be there and to be developing the solutions and the companies of tomorrow. So this is another reason it's super crucial. Okay, and the very last thing I want to touch on is why 2021 is so significant, why this timing could not be more perfect to have the US back in. So at the very beginning of the video, I mentioned that the Paris Agreement operates on a 5-year ambition cycle. So meaning that every 5 years, countries are supposed to up their ambition and resubmit their NDCs, their contributions. If you do the math, the agreement was negotiated in 2015. 2020 was meant to be the very first time that countries would submit these new NDCs. In addition, at the COP planned for 2020, COP26, the idea was to negotiate a few very important operational elements of the Paris Agreement. One being how global carbon markets would work, and others around how we would fund loss and damage, so damage that's happening from disasters, for example, as well as what the future of climate finance and the Green Climate Fund looks like. So these are very important issues to making this thing a reality. All of that was supposed to happen in 2020, and then, COVID. So what happens next? Why is 2021 so crucial? The COP that was set to take place in 2020 has been pushed forward to November 2021. And everything that was supposed to happen in 2020 now needs to take place this year. So it's an incredibly important time for making this agreement a reality. And also with what we've seen with COVID, for using this as an opportunity to build back better, to, invest in low carbon economy, to invest in clean energy solutions, to invest in sustainable agriculture solutions, all of these things that contribute to our climate future. So in total, the US was out of the Paris Agreement for 107 days, which, yes, it does suck, but it could not be a better time to have them in. I'm so excited that the US will be at the table in this very important year for climate action, and I look forward to all 190 parties of the agreement charting a common way forward on this crucially important topic. So that's all I have. Let's quickly summarize so that you have everything you need to know about this topic now. The Paris Agreement was reached on December 12, 2015, and was later adopted by 190 countries. The United States was a crucial participant in reaching the Paris Agreement because it is a large emitter and has the world's largest economy. President Obama signed the Paris Agreement in April 2016, and it came into effect on November 4th, 2016, just 4 days before President Trump was elected. President Trump was a strong critic of the Paris Agreement, and because of some restrictions within its withdrawal clause, could not withdraw right away. The moment he was able to withdraw, November 4th, 2019, he did so, and this process came into effect on November 4th, 2020, the day after the presidential election that would see him removed from office. In total, the US spent 107 days outside the Paris Agreement because President Joe Biden signed the executive order to rejoin the Paris Agreement on January 20th, 2021. After a 30-day reinstatement period, the US became an official party to the agreement again on February 19th, 2021. Biden has pledged to release a comprehensive emission reduction plan in April 2021 and to hold a meeting of world leaders to ramp up their commitments to the Paris Agreement as well. This is a big deal because the US is a strong leader in multilateralism, and without them, it's very easy to dilute ambition and have other countries not take this as seriously. In addition, there's a common but differentiated responsibility in the agreement, and because the US is the largest historic emitter, it has a large responsibility to help developing countries address and respond to climate challenges. It's also a huge contributor to climate finance, with President Obama committing $3 billion, only $1 billion of which was ever paid. There is now also a push for the US to commit up to $8 billion. Finally, the US, anytime it makes a move, is a strong investment signal to finance and business communities. 2021 is an extremely significant year because this is the year when a number of important operational issues will get negotiated, and it's also the first 5-year cycle for ramping up ambition. To date, 43 of the 190 parties have submitted their new commitments, and we're hoping to see more in the coming months. So with that, I will close. Thank you all so much for being here. I hope you learned something new, and if you did, give this video a like and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you have any questions, pop them in the comments below. I'll do my best to provide resources with more information. And if you have ideas for video topics, please do leave those there as well. Every single time I provide a blog post that summarizes this in writing, as well as provides access to my research, resources where you can learn more, and a couple organizations that you might choose to follow or support if you like this topic. Thank you so much for following Hippie in a Suit. See you in the next one, and in the meantime, keep fighting the good fight. Bye!